Hey there, welcome to episode 39 of the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program. Episode 39, we're moving right along. Today is November 16, 2023. It is Thursday. Probably going to publish this early. Normally aim for Friday. If you're listening to this, it probably doesn't matter to you. But some holiday stuff, some slight changes to schedules. But today's episode, Taking the Long Way, some tales and policy views from your host. That's me, Dan Hugo, Managing Director of the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, a Nevada nonprofit, public charity, 501c3. We received our determination just over a year ago. Still need to do the name change paperwork with the IRS. They do not make it easy. Our name is officially changed from Code for Vegas Foundation to Innovate for Vegas Foundation with the state. You must file your 990N electronically. That's your tax return for a nonprofit. We didn't make any money. Don't worry about that. Our expenses exceeded our donations by about a factor of 3. But sort of apropos, we do have to write a letter on paper, print it, put it in an envelope with a stamp, send this letter to the IRS with copies of our name change paperwork, our articles update with the state of Nevada. We have to do something similar for the EIN, name change, the employer identification number. So knowing that process and tracking it down is kind of a pain. It was kind of a pain to amend our articles to get the process right. The process should be easy. There's always some hidden detail. Just for example, you would think the IRS, if they're accepting electronic tax returns, when I first said, I did a quick search for a name change, and they said, when you file your 990, you provide material change information like governance changes. We added a board of directors member, a director. Our president departed, which was good for everybody. And our registered agent change, that's a minor. I don't think that goes on the 990. But anyway, so these sorts of changes you make a note of there. But if you have changed your name, you got to write them a letter. So that's kind of weird. It's a slight mismatch. And because it's a paper process that involves the U.S. Postal Service, the other one is explicitly not. You can explicitly not send, they call it a postcard tax return. It's that simple. Two completely different processes. So you have to figure these things out. You have to know what you're looking for. You have to know who to ask if you don't. You have to have some idea how these processes work. And that's a nice segue into our discussion today, taking the long way. You can see in the show notes, there's only 2 links today, although you are always welcome to visit our website, innovateforvegas.org, all spelled out, FOR, not the numeral 4. I'll get to those links in a second. The summary for Taking the Long Way. We've been rebooted for about 2 years now, and there are several questions that have come up multiple times. I hate to be glib. No, I love it actually, but the answers are usually pretty simple. But the one I get a lot is, why don't you just use WordPress? Why don't you just use some existing service or tool? Why do we have to develop something? These were in the early days when we had actual volunteers showing up. Recidivism, not a problem. But why don't we just use the existing, why don't we use Google Forms, for example, right? And nowadays, of course, why don't you just use AI? Why don't you just use Copilot or GPT? I always say that wrong. Why do we have to do things and learn how they work and innovate? Why don't we just use something off the shelf? That's the essential nature of the question. And there is an answer. And that is the topic of today. Kind of foreshadowed it with Taking the Long Way. So I went to Harvey Mudd College. This is my yarn I'm spinning, but it's real. It's a true story. I went to Harvey Mudd College back in my day. Get off my lawn. Back in my day, they had a class called E54, which was experimental engineering. I believe it has been replaced by E82 or something, which has rocketry or some other different stuff. I believe they took out I think you make a hammer. I'll explain what that means. So our freshman year of college was essentially advanced version of high school classes. So chemistry, physics, biology, rhetoric, which was essentially a writing class, how to get your thoughts on paper, electronic or otherwise. So pretty straightforward curriculum. And then the second year, the sophomore year, is when you start taking some tricky stuff. You take electronics and magnetism. You're taking differential equations, linear algebra. Some of those are probably high school level, but these are the more appropriate for technical pursuits. So you're taking the bigger classes. Now, in the second semester of your sophomore year, you basically break into, and this is the old way, I haven't checked this out in the current regime, but second semester, sophomore year, it was a 2-semester per year program, no trimesters. So the spring semester was the beginning of your chosen major curriculum. Harvey Mudd's engineering curriculum was pretty intense. It was a lot of year-long classes packed into one semester, a year at a lesser school. But so you're moving pretty quickly, and the focus was not on learning the finer points, but learning how to learn the finer points. So that's probably a discussion for another day. If I can get my friend and colleague, Dr. David Stepp, to join us someday, we can talk about how we cultivate the innovation sort of mindset starting in the academic times. I say it starts at 7th grade, age 12-ish, but we'll see what he thinks. Anyway, so we're starting our engineering curriculum, and E54, it's 4 days a week. You are assigned a lab. So for us, for example, it was Monday night, Tuesday afternoon. So we were section 1, and I was in group 1. So 3 people in a lab team, group, whatever. And you go through a dozen or 15 or whatever it was, lab experiments. Got your lab notebook, got the description of the problem. And all of these were problems that we had not learned about yet. That's what made it fun. So the core of the class was 2 days a week. So I think it was a 4-hour lab each day. So 2 days. Typically, you would spend the first evening. So it was Monday evening, Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening, Wednesday afternoon. Four different sections through the week. So you'd go to the lab, figure out what was going on. After the first day, they were pretty draconian about shutting the lab, right? Pencils down, lab notebooks. I believe we were not allowed to take our lab notebooks out. So you had to basically remember, typically meet up after the lab, like go to dinner, then meet up in the library or wherever. Try to figure out how to recover on the second day. The laboratory problems at the time, so we're sophomores in college. We've learned very basic control theory, very basic. Systems engineering was in first semester. First? Yeah, I think everybody took basic systems. So you're talking Fourier and Laplace transformations on differential equations, system models, but very basic stuff. So we had the underpinnings. Was that? That might have been second semester. It doesn't matter. We don't have enough information to complete these labs. The laboratories were things like designing a feedback control loop for temperature control of a heated rod. So you'd apply heat on one end of a rod and you'd measure the temperature on the other end. Then you had a goal, a set point. You'd have your parameters for your PID controller configured so that you'd have a particular rise time, settle time, and reach your set point, according to these parameters. So you'd learn about how temperature controllers work and how PID controllers work and how to tune the parameters and how to deal with approximations of the transient startup, the Poisson approximation, if I recall correctly. So we didn't know any of these things when you start your lab at probably like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Maybe it was 3, I can't remember. I'm sorry. Yeah, it started in the evening, in the afternoon, and end in the evening. Maybe it was 4, I can't remember. So you're done with lab, you go to dinner, you catch the end of the dining hall dinner slot. So when you get there, you're like, okay, we have the temperature controller lab. How does this work? Other labs were things like water pressure drops. So you had to design a sprinkler system. So you had to calculate pressure drops on bends. So we had basically a U-shaped sprinkler PVC pipe segment with bending parts. So it would come in horizontally, it would bend up vertically, go up probably 2-3 feet, maybe a meter. I can't remember if it was a precise measurement. We had to measure it at the time, of course. Bend to the right, another flat horizontal segment, a bend down to our sort of tabletop level, and then a bend to the right, and then a loop back to the supply, the drain. You'd have water flowing through it, and there were pressure sensors on either side of the bends and on the flat segments, on the verticals, on the horizontals. So you probably got like a dozen pressure drops, and you could literally measure what the water was doing through this plumbing. And there was dye in the water to color it, so you could make some sort of an observation, I think, if I recall. And I seem to recall that our drain, so the end of the plumbing would flow into a sort of like a big sink, a basin on the lab bench. And then the intake to push water back through the system would draw from that. So the drain basin was open. It was not a closed loop system. And somehow, I don't remember when did this happen, but somehow the exit, we had too much pressure. The exit line escaped the basin and started shooting water everywhere. So that was fun. That's called learning. We had a torsional pendulum, so it was a paint can hanging from a metal rod with small weights that could be attached to the bottom, and a viscous fluid, a mixture of antifreeze and probably alcohol. You could vary the ratio and thus vary the viscosity. And during the lab class, we were trying to model the period of the pendulum so that you could create a fictitious sign that would hang and rotate in a storefront. So this was a model to develop this. So we had to learn how to model a torsional pendulum, how to measure the effect of the viscosity of the dampening liquid, the mass. So if you're familiar with pendulums, you know what I'm talking about. And our professor during the class, he was a first-year professor at Harvey Mudd, is Professor Cha. He was not going to play along with the game that our engineering department was playing with us. So he just said flat out, you can't do this. This is not a solvable problem. And we said, really? And he said, yeah, this is so complex a system. This is like a 3-body problem. Viscous, liquid, damper. The damper is nonlinear, right? It's crazy. It's a crazy DE, differential equation, and the torsional pendulum, and all this stuff. He's like, yeah, this is purely an exercise in learning that you cannot do something. But anyway, so there were many labs. The designing an elastomer to dampen a CD player using we called it the MTS machine. It was a programmable load machine. You could program an input to a system, and it would drive a sine wave or constant offset or whatever. Fun times. The measuring Young's modulus. I'm just recalling these from literally the torture that was E54. They're burned into my memory. So the measuring Young's modulus and force application to a metal rod until it fails. So it goes from the elastic region to the plastic region. Stress over strain for the win. So these were all educational. We did not know what we were doing ahead of time. So we had to learn. We had to discuss. We had to ideate. Sometimes we had to innovate. We had to learn how these things worked. And after, there was a lecture component in the morning, like one day a week. The lectures, so here's the deal. There were like a dozen lab teams. Was it that many? Probably 10. So there were labs for each week of the semester. And there were however many teams were spread over the week. My graduating class had 70 students, so teams of 3. So there were, say, 24 teams, 23. I think somebody dropped out in there. So it was 23 teams, 24, 23, something like that. Sophomore year, there was probably more than 70. It was probably more like 80. So say we had 25 teams. Let's call it a round number. 25 teams spread across the week, 4 days. You're going to have like 8 teams per 7. Say 7. Really 6 or 7. So it seemed like it was more than that. There must have been more students that were not yet on to other things from Harvey Mudd, but we had a room full of teams of 3 people. What you end up with is a bunch of empty lab stations because there's more labs than teams, and you have a lecture once a week, but you maybe taking your week might be in a lab station that has not had a lecture yet. So we'd have one 90-minute lecture on lab subjects, so we had no background in, not even any intuition really, a little bit, but no formal intuition, no lecture, no. So you're left to your own devices. So you had to figure things out. Sort of like being self-taught, except that you're about to be taught. So you got to learn in a formal setting how your intuition was working or not working. You'd submit your lab, and it turns out section 1, day 1, section 1, lab 1, whatever, group 1. I was section 1, group 1. I think that's what we called it. So I was group 1, Monday night. We somehow ended up doing all the labs out of sync with the lectures. So every week we were doing a lab that we had no background in. Because we were the first section, we couldn't even ask the team from the day before, like, what did you guys do? We had nothing. We could only ask the students in the junior class who may remember something from the previous year. And Harvey Mudd has this tradition of not telling you things that you that are for your own good, that you will learn later. So if you're a mudder, you want to skip over this part. Okay, mudders are not listening, right? So here's the deal with E54. Well, actually, they don't have the class anymore. It doesn't matter. E54 was graded with that knowledge in mind. So if you were day 1, section 1, I said group 1, right? We're Monday night, group 1. All we had to do was try to finish the labs. If we were section 4, group 8, or whatever, they expected a little bit more from that group because they knew people would help each other. They would collaborate. They would have more time. At the end of the week, you've had time to talk to the other teams. You've had time to learn about the challenges and do some research, right? But if you're on day 1, group 1, section 1, group 1, you're on your own, as we were. Let's add to that my 2 teammates. One of them wanted to pursue a football career. He said, on day 1, one of my teammates, my lab partners, said, I don't want to be here. I'm dropping out. That's going to be fun. The other person said, with a straight face, I'm good at writing up labs, so I'll be in charge of writing in the lab notebook. We had one shared lab notebook. That was the basis of our grade. It was an important feature. What he was telling me was, I'm going to watch while you do the labs, which is how it went. So I was basically stressed out every week. But I've just described to you lab classes and the experiments, and there were other experiments. There was a heat exchanger. We learned about Reynolds number and turbulent versus laminar flow, and how that affects heat exchange in opposing or parallel flows. These are labs that I took 32 years ago, 32 and a half years ago, and I remember them as though they are set up in my room right now. Well, maybe not quite that good, but I do remember them because when you're learning things at that level, you're learning with a little bit of pressure, kind of like a hackathon, and you're not exactly sure what you're doing. You know what you have to accomplish, but you're not sure how to get there. You tend to learn. So I did. So I learned a ton about PID control, about Young's modulus, E and G. I can't remember what the G. Young's modulus is the slope of the stress over strain line until you reach failure, so in the elastic region. And then G is in the plastic region. It's the slope while your sample is necking and stretching irreversibly. So these are things I learned when I was, 19? And that's why when materials topics come up, or when pressure drops, or when torsional pendulums, or base excitation motion dampers, or any number of things come up in conversation, I can actually reflect on practical experience working with them. I'm not a material scientist. I am not a control system specialist. However, I'm basically conversant in these things. And so when you actually take the time to learn how things work, you can apply those in any number of ways moving forward through your career, through your hobbies, through anything really. And this, I'm telling you my engineering story because that's what I am. This applies to any number of things: cooking, automotive repair, music. Want to build a musical instrument? Same thing. So not only did we have these experimental lab classes, that was only a part of the class. So the other part, we had to do CAD-like drawings, but with pencil and paper, the good old-fashioned way, like drafting. So we were drawing technical drawings, so specifications, dimension lines, 3-view, orthographic projections, things like this. So these are essentially shop drawings, that as though you were going to build something like a pulley or a gearbox or whatever it was, whatever the drawings were. I don't remember those. But I do remember drawing, and I was fortunate enough to have learned some of these things in junior high school. I had very progressive shop teachers in 7th and 8th grade. They were really, really focused on drawing and then building things. So that was handy. Our final assignment was using CAD, the CAD application of our choice. So I think we had a CAD application on a Mac that we were able to use, but mostly focusing on the origin of technical drawing. So we learned how these things worked and why. And why don't I just use CAD? Well, you have now learned why you should use CAD because you know what happens when you don't have CAD. Why do you want to know how a slide rule works? Because I have my HP or my TI scientific calculator. Why do I need to know how to multiply numbers with logs? What does that even mean? Well, if you do know those things, then you understand more about how these things work. That all comes in handy. In addition to the shop drawings, we had a shop assignment. Now that we know how drawings work, we had to make a hammer and a screwdriver and put them in a sheet metal tool tray, which we also had to make, so that it would fit in a little red, I think they call it the Little Buddy toolbox. So you were handed a little billet of steel to make a hammer head. You were handed a steel rod to make a screwdriver blade. You were handed a lucite cylinder to make a screwdriver handle. You were handed a block of wood, probably, I'm going to say like 2-inch square by probably about 12 inches to make a hammer handle. There were some other materials to make the soft and hard faces of the hammer head. You were given a sheet of sheet metal. You had to learn how to use a sheet metal brake, an end mill, a metal lathe, a wood lathe. We had to heat treat the hard face and the screwdriver blade. So we had to learn how austenizing worked, heat treating, and then we had to do micrograph before and after samples and demonstrate the interstitial austenite particles and show how the TTT, time temperature transition diagram, was followed in the heat, cool, quench path. If you've ever wondered how horseshoeing works with the blacksmith heating up the shoe and banging on it and then dropping it in a bucket of water to quench. That's what we were learning very practically. So here again, learning by doing, not just looking and saying, oh, okay, I'll let somebody else do this. Extremely valuable. So I often reflect on that component of my education. For as frustrating and difficult as it was indeed with a capital E, educational. I am getting to the point, I promise. There's an old African proverb, or story really. The story is allegedly a Peace Corps volunteer, or maybe it's a missionary. That's how these things work. I first heard this story on the television show Home Improvement. Tim the Toolman was speaking to his neighbor Wilson, who was always on the other side of the fence. He only saw his eyes and his hat. And he described to Tim this very story, which is the teacher, the educator, the missionary, whoever it was, has some students, and there's a student who wants to give this teacher a gift to show appreciation for the teaching, the education, the work that they've done. So the student either lives very far away or probably more likely ventures to the beach to retrieve a very cool seashell. It's a long distance, something, say it's 30 miles. The student returns from this trip and offers the seashell to the teacher or the missionary. And the person says, this is wonderful. It's very beautiful. I appreciate this. But it's so far. You walked such a great distance. And the student says, but teacher, the journey is part of the gift. And that really struck me at the time. The effort that goes into something is part of what you are giving someone. This often comes up here in Vegas when you organize an event, if you're trying to drive a hackathon for a particular challenge. No challenge in particular, indeed, but for any challenge. Throwing an event, if you have a gathering that you've planned and put effort into, and then nobody shows up, it's like, well, no big deal. It didn't cost any money, right? Oh, it was a free meetup space at the Innovation Center. Great. But the journey is the time and energy that you put into making that happen. The actual event, the actual happening is part of it, but the effort that goes into it, the journey, is part of the gift. It's part of the thing you're giving to people. So that is usually my glib answer to why don't you just use WordPress, or why are you taking the time to do something when it's already been done? And everything I've described so far has already been done. All of our lab classes, all of our educational pursuits in school are new, except for Harvey Mudd has a clinic program. That's another story from another time, where you'd actually do real projects. But the take home is that you are, of course, learning along the way. And that's how you learn, is by knowing how a system should work, knowing that it can work because it's been done, but making your system work. I often tell people about a time I was at Coder Dojo in Cork, Ireland, probably a 10-year-old. There were two 10-year-olds, a boy and a girl, separately working on their projects. One of them was building a traffic controller, a street light, traffic control signal. And you might be inclined to say, well, that's been done already. But that person has never done it before. So part of that learning process is doing something so that you learn how it works. That's the journey. So I was always Tim the Toolman, Wilson, I guess, more appropriately, stuck with me. And I use that frequently to describe why we want to ideate, innovate, and implement rather than taking off the shelf something like WordPress. And this applies also to if you're a chef, if you're an artist. Well, I mean, why write a story? You can just copy and paste a story from somewhere else, right? So the question is, do you learn how it works, or do you learn how to make it work, or do you learn simply that it works? There's a classic meme for software engineering. The junior programmer, maybe just fresh out of boot camp, or maybe not even, gets some code working finally and proclaims it works and celebrates. A senior engineer in similar circumstances, senior programmer, says, it works, and questions, and now delves in to figure out why this thing that probably should not be working is working. And that the difference is experience and the intellectual curiosity it takes to want to know that your system works as expected. That will save you a lot of trouble, or worse, later. You want that engineer working on the Boeing flight control systems to know why something works and why it doesn't. And if that is left to chance, and it's left to some sales option that nobody has described sufficiently, included in pilot training, then you get catastrophe. So knowing how things work, really how things work, is intensely valuable sometimes. It's personally valuable all the time. Making it work is sticking things together. I can use a cooking example. I often use cooking because everybody cooks. Not everyone is a chef, or a line cook even. But if you've seen an inexperienced person making the most, like, I put in too many eggs, I will just add more flour, right? They're trying to deal with the problem they've created. I've seen software engineers, programmers, commenting out blocks of code because they don't know what the code is doing. They don't know what the impact will be of commenting it out. That will always come back to haunt you. It will bite you in the butt. Huge supply chain issues about importing code that you have no idea where it came from. The same could be said if you're cooking. I remember my grandmother was preparing a New York style cheesecake. It required 40 ounces of Philadelphia cream cheese, and I think it was 8 eggs. And she cracked all the eggs, put them in this cream cheese that was already whipped up in the KitchenAid, and the eggs were bad. That doesn't happen too often, but the eggs had gone bad at some point. So unexpectedly, completely ruined everything, but not known at the time. The eggs were just on the edge. But when the cheesecake was done cooking in the oven, yes, cooking a cheesecake in the oven, it was just awful. It looked like curdled cheese, completely bogus, like visually obvious. So the take home was understand your ingredients, where they came from, what their shelf life is. This is chef thinking, right? You have to know what you're preparing for people so that when you give it out to people, you know that it won't kill anybody. So understanding how your system works, how your ingredients work, how your preparations work is ultimately the mark of expertise. It's the mark of knowledgeable intent. You understand what you're doing. You understand what happens when you don't do it differently. You understand the things to check for. So you understand a system. And that is ultimately valuable not only as a job skill, but as a hobby skill, as a personal skill. It's a basis for additional education. If you run into someone who is self-taught, I'm going to wager that they were self-taught after they learned a lot of things from someone else. If they're good, that's going to be most of the time. Making it work is just sticking things together. If we use the cooking analogy again, it's basically a question of, taking the box cake mix or the frozen dinner, the can of Chef Boyardee. That's an interesting story, by the way. Chef Boyardee. It used to be Boyardee. Now, then they changed it for the marketing brand name to Boyardee. But he was an actual chef, actually preparing these foods, and he created a brand. But if you are in the business of simply making it work, well, I worked at McDonald's, so if we want to talk about making burgers all day, it didn't matter to me the technical details. Why am I putting this salt and pepper seasoning concoction on each patty? Why am I searing it 10 seconds for 10 to 1s? Why am I flipping them at 1 minute? Didn't matter to me. Just getting through the process and delivering however many hamburgers and cheeseburgers on the call, I guess, the order. Making it work. That's all that mattered. So simply making things work by plugging them together, integrating them. You might want to make pottery and you just put it in the kiln and you follow the directions and it comes out or it doesn't, and you don't really have a clear idea of what the kiln, remember TTT diagrams, what the temperature, the time that you're applying the heat, how fast the heat rises. If your heat controller, if your temperature controller on your kiln is not completely functional, it may cool too slowly. It may, once it reaches temperature, it may overshoot. And when your finished product comes out of the kiln, you might say, hey, this doesn't seem right. But if you don't have the intuition of knowing how it works, you only make it work by dropping it in and pushing a button and then coming back in 2 hours or 10 hours, whatever it is, then you have no intuition to fall back on when you have to fix what might be wrong. And even worse is when you just say, I guess it worked, and you don't even know exactly what to look for to know that it didn't. I found a nice quote in the links. Oh, and I forgot the do easy, which is a William S. Burroughs thing. I'll tell that next. So I found a quote from, I have no idea if she's still there. There was no date, which is always annoying. Emily Bester at the Oregon State University College of Business quoted, the article is about this in general. I understand how things work is the name of the article. Her quote, I'm someone who is analytical and likes to understand how things work, not just that they work. And the article goes on to describe why she feels this way, why she takes this approach. Spot on. Totally matches what I'm trying to say here. Much shorter. Brevity is good, but why be brief when you can be detailed? So do easy is this. I came across this many years ago. I think I was in high school, probably before that. It's a black and white video. It's on the link in the show notes, the allenginsberg.org website, the Allen Ginsberg Project. And so the post is from 2015, but the content is from long before that. So Burroughs has this notion of mindfulness. Do easy is being aware of what you're doing, and so on. It's a 9-minute video. I think I just watched it really quickly to refresh. When I first saw it, the take home for me, the thing that made me go, oh, interesting, was there's a person walking through a room. For some reason, it's like a director's chair. The chair moves towards him, so he runs into it. The less practical example, I guess, or the more practical, the more realistic example would be if you stub your toe. Do you ever stub your toe on a table or a chair or whatever? You hit your toe and you keep walking. And you just keep going. And you do it all the time. I keep hitting that table. I keep hitting the corner of the whatever. You hit your knee, hit your elbow on a thing, on a wall, on a doorknob, whatever. So the do easy or DE method, you have your collision, you stop, you fix whatever. If the thing was in the wrong place and you run into it, you put it in the right place. You step back and you walk by it again and you clear without running into it the thing, and then you go on about your day. And you make sure you do that all the time. If you ever run into it, you stop, you move it, you adjust, you make yourself aware of the circumstance, you step back and you redo the motion. And what you're essentially doing is, with intent, you're training yourself to not stub your toe or bump your elbow or whatever. And there are several examples in the video. It's fascinating. So this is mindful learning, muscle memory, if you like. There are a lot of examples, but that one stuck with me for some reason because I tend to bump into things like that. So the take home, though, is that do easy is the outcome of taking the long way, right? Obviously, it's quick and easy to stub your toe and keep going and like limp or curse a little bit. It takes longer to do the hard way, the long way, which is to go back and move and readjust and redo the steps and conscientiously avoid, step properly, step around, whatever you have to do. And to do that on a recurring basis until you have developed what is then a mindful outcome, then you can do easy. You don't have to run into that thing. You don't have to stub your toe. So the hard way gets you to the easy way. So I always found that when I first came across that, like I said, a long time ago, I added that to the mental Rolodex. You probably don't know what a Rolodex is, but that's okay. So the Do Easy link and the Emily Besser quote are linked in the show notes. So finally, I will comment on, this was not popular until recently. Do we get to use AI? Now add I or don't, as my notes say. So recently, 6 months ago or so, there was somebody who wanted to work on a project, a rarity. And he said, I just use ChatGPT or Copilot on GitHub, or maybe a combination of both. Much easier than writing code. And I said, until you need to debug it. Debug it, what does that mean? If you don't understand how your system works, if someone else writes your code for you, or if you use or import code that you don't know, you haven't audited, you haven't checked it, you've never delved into it, you import a black box, as they call it, a mystery. You just import from NPM or PyPy, is that how you pronounce it? PYPI? Or wherever, a crate from Rust or whatever. You're importing these code modules and you've never looked at how they work. You have no idea. Then when something doesn't work, you have no idea where to even begin, because it's literally a black box. That's an expression that says, I don't know how it works, I'm just using it. A cake mix could be a black box if you never look at the ingredients and you don't know how cake works. You're like, I don't know, it's just a bunch of powder. I put it in a bowl, I throw an egg and some water or milk or something, or maybe some butter or oil, and I blend it and I put it in the oven. That's all I know. So it's a black box. And then somebody says, is there gluten, or is there, are there nuts? Is there like almond flour? If you have a nut allergy. So if you don't know what's in the system, you don't know how it works, you have a hard time answering questions or fixing problems. So to me, AI tools as tools, like spell checking a document, maybe some grammar checking, that's been around forever. and it never really works. Never works well. The same with auto-correcting keyboards on mobile phones. The screen keyboard, they never really work right. And you correct the same things all the time. So if AI tools can be assistive like that, wonderful. If you find yourself saying, I don't want to write this, I will have ChatGPT write my emails, send them out. I will have it write a brief for a judge. That's been done unsuccessfully. Write my term paper for me, do my homework, write my wedding vows, whatever. If you're just going to hand that off and not know how the system works, you're going to run into the same problem. That's my view. So if you have your app, say you don't want to do coding, you're a no code kind of person. So you say, ChatGPT, write me an app that will do a survey of people attending my meetup, and we'll show them a QR code and then capture some information, and it writes all this code for you. And then you deploy it and people are using it, and then they say, hey, this didn't work, that didn't work. And you're like, I don't know how it works. Now you have to figure out how it works and fix the problem. Or you have to try to describe to your large language model how to write the next version so it doesn't do the thing, but you don't even know what it's really doing. So how does this really work? In the exciting world of home construction, if you've ever lived in a home that you have built or had built for you, there's a mode of executing a construction project called owner builder. Rather than paying a general contractor, the owner of the property or the eventual owner of the home when it's built, the person that will live in it probably, until they flip it, sell it, the owner builder, who doesn't know anything, doesn't know what they're doing, says, I will save the money and I will run this project myself. And eventually they will reach a point where the project is a complete mess and they've spent way more money and things are not fitting together and not working. They're failing their inspections for plumbing and electrical and all that. They didn't know who to talk to. It's just a mess. So what do? They call a general contractor. They have the general contractor come in and undo weeks or months of their dalliance and then get the project back on track. So now it has cost way more money. It's taken way more time. And at the end of the day, your owner-builder dreams have been dashed by someone with more experience, more insight, more intuition. They have been there. They've done that. They have the skills. They're probably skilled in one or more trades that are directly connected to home construction, right? They're the general contractor. They're probably also a carpenter, a plumber, electrician, maybe all of those things, maybe more. So they have the actual skills. They know how it works. They are not just making it work. And they're not shrugging and saying, I guess it works, or maybe it doesn't. I don't know. And there are all manner of stories and TV shows, reality shows or whatnot on Discovery, maybe Discovery streaming channel, Discovery Plus or something. Why is my restaurant not working? Why is my bar not working? Why is my salon not working? Why is my home remodel not working? There are tons of these where somebody will come in and say, oh, here are the problems because I know this system. I know how it works and I know what you're doing wrong. And the person in situ is completely lost. They've been making it work. But they've never known for sure how it works. So the long and the short of it, the reason why Innovate for Vegas projects will basically require or ask very strongly that you do not simply copy and paste, that you do not use the work of others, for example. That violates licenses too. But do not use AI to write code for you or if you want to be a creator, if you want to create logos and images, if you want to translate text. Sure, automated tools are handy. They're a good starting point, but don't just blindly if I were to translate from English to another language or another language to English, I'm never really sure if it's a language I don't know. I mean, a speaking language or writing language, a human communication language. If it's a language I don't know, I'm never really sure if the translation is correct. I kind of hope for the best. If you have the skills to translate bodies of text from one language to another, use the automated tools, but check them, check the output, see what turned out weird. See if meaning was lost or changed. Same goes for solder your own circuitry, develop your own recipes, pick your own ingredients, mix your own paints, tune your own musical instrument, change the strings on your violin or guitar, tighten the drum head on your drum set. And when you know how these things work, you end up winning. So you know your tools, you know how the systems work, and no matter what you do, you will come out ahead. You will You will learn more. You will impress. You will probably make more money. You will be able to impress others. You will be able to deliver an opinion or a knowledgeable solution, and you will really know what you're talking about. And if you don't know what you're talking about, you might know where to go to learn to add to your knowledge base, because you may know most of it, and you just got to learn a few extra things to figure out how this particular system works. If you know how to fix a car, it doesn't mean you know how to fix every car, but you do know when you come upon a car that you don't know how to fix, you know which parts you do know and which parts you don't. If you know how to fix a car, but you were not familiar what ODB2 is, once you figure out what ODB2 is, now you know exactly what all the numbers it's telling you are, right? Oh, there's a pressure reading. I know what that means. I remember from my pressure drop class, my lab at Harvey Mudd, that bend in the manifold, that pressure drop should be different than what it is, right? So if you understand what you're looking at, what you're smelling and tasting and cooking and not cooking, coding, soldering, plugging into high current power supplies, you should know what you're doing. And that is what we are trying to develop, is knowledgeable innovators who can take away real job skills and not find themselves copying and pasting code, probably stealing code from others if that's the case. Stack Overflow, Stack Exchange, blah. Know what you're doing. You will learn more in doing it, and later you will take that knowledge with you. You will succeed more. You will impress more. You will probably make more money or otherwise. So that's how we innovate. Understand the tools, the techniques, the systems, how they function, where they came from, how they've evolved. That was the drawing versus CAD, for example. You can use CNC, computer numeric controlled machine tools, to build your systems. You can use 3D printers. Build a 3D printer. Know how the printhead works. That was the story with RipRap, which became MakerBot. Their initial goal was to build a 3D printer that could build a 3D printer. That's what FabLab goal is. Build a Fab Lab that can build Fab Labs. That's entire laboratories that are able to create, fabricate, invent, implement itself. So that's cutting edge thinking. So the more you understand, the more valuable your contributions will be. And that's what we're trying to develop. That's how we innovate. It's how we identify areas where innovation is possible, maybe even valuable. That's how you come up with entrepreneurial endeavors, pursuits that will ultimately solve problems, bring you fame and fortune, and ultimately make life a little bit better for people. Intuition and experience come from working this way, and they will return on your investment. The results will be worth it. All of our projects are like that. Vastly prefer homegrown, or at least understand the code you're working on. If it's a code project, try to develop imagery or visualizations or language translations. Dig into how systems work. Dig into how people that will use the systems work. If you develop in a vacuum and then you launch your product, and the people you are trying to convince to use what you've developed, it could be food, could be code, could be whatever. I always say, when you prepare food for someone, they come over to your home or you go to theirs, or you make a meal, you put it in front of them, or they serve it, and they spoon it into the bowl or onto the plate. First question, you know what you're going to ask them. You already know. I don't even have to say it, but I will. How is it? And they'll tell you. If they're smart, they'll just tell you it's good. But, hey, it needs more salt. It needs more of this. It's crunchy. It's undercooked, whatever it is. You will learn from that. If you know what you did, you will apply what they tell you, and you will improve. So being able to do this in the real world and interact with people, or write real code that really works and you know how it works, building hardware systems, translating language, creating paint colors or sculptures, or 3D printing on a system that you understand how, all these things, you will be better for knowing and not merely shrugging and being amazed at every outcome at every turn. So there you go. I feel like I've rambled, but I've been kind of imagining these things throughout my presentation. Whenever, 100% of the time, whenever I've worked with, collaborated with, or had to deal with a person who really doesn't know what they're doing, hackers, making their stuff work, not knowing why, and handing it to me, and now I have to deal with it. This is why people are very pedantic about code commits, about comments, about commit comments, about code comments, about variable names, about code style. The more time you spend trying to deal, the less time you can spend implementing and perfecting your project. Same with anything else. If you've ever read Kitchen Confidential, I make reference to cooking a lot. I grew up with an Italian mom and a grandmother. I've worked in the restaurant business. Food is important. Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain, the late Anthony Bourdain. He has a nice comment about, line cooks doing exactly what they're supposed to do. Line cooks are craftsmen in the book, but today, craftspeople. They know what they're doing. They can do it repeatedly. They can do it precisely so that every time it's exactly as the previous time. That is what a craftsperson does. They know what they're doing. An artisan may become creative. And he said, there's no room for creativity in the kitchen. You want the exact same dish coming out exactly as you were told to do it every time. So if you know how a system works and you can read a spec and you can build a system and you can build it again, that's how you learn. That's how you build positive outcomes. That's how you become successful. And that applies to so many things. And so I think food is a really good example because it's a very accessible example. Most people eat. Most of those people prepare food in some way, whether professionally or just because of that whole I need to eat thing. It's a good example. I have gone on long enough. I appreciate you listening through all this. It's a really important thing. The Innovate for Vegas Foundation is not a software company. We're really trying to make better innovators. So if you know how to innovate because you've taken the time to understand how things work, we will all be better for it. Our innovation culture needs you. We're trying to be there so you can be too. Thanks for listening. If you don't listen during Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving. There will be another show. You can listen to it after. Spend time with your family. Enjoy, and then ponder working on some community elevation projects. Be a local innovator and do some local innovation. I do it all the time.